Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well. A little overdue, but here we are, my June and July recent reads. So I read quite a lot across June and July by my usual standards. I read around 15 books. We have some literary fiction, some fantasy, some non-fiction, some poetry and some YA. And we range from 2.5-star reads to 5-star reads across these books, so it's all very exciting. Without further ado, let's get into the books because none of us want this video to be half an hour long. So first up, in June I reread The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I then reread The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty, and then went on to read for the first time The Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. So in short, the Daevabad trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty is my new favourite fantasy series of all time. I read the first two books last year and absolutely fell in love, and ever since then I have been eagerly anticipating the release of the third and final book. So in celebration of the release of the final book, I thought I would reread the first two books and read them all back to back, and it was a delight. So this trilogy is set in an alternate 18th century Middle East and follows a young woman called Nari who makes a living by tricking rich nobles until one day she accidentally summons a Jinn warrior and is whisked away to the magical kingdom of Daevabad. I'm focusing more on the trilogy as a whole here instead of the third book specifically because I don't want to give any spoilers. So I cannot say enough good things about this series. It is exactly what I want from fantasy. The world is so vast and rich. The history and the politics and all of the different tribes and their languages are so complex, totally convincing. The setting is absolutely gorgeous. I love being there. I said in a previous video that it felt as though I could see the world shimmering in the Egyptian heat, and I totally stand by that. I'm obsessed with all of the characters in here, the three main characters in particular, but also all of the other side characters that come in and out throughout the series. Everyone is so interesting and so complicated. Everyone holds such opposing views, but you really see where everyone is coming from. My allegiances switched a good few times. In terms of the last book more specifically, I absolutely loved it. This book just stepped up every step of the way for me. You get to learn so much more about the characters and really see them grow and develop, and ultimately you really care for them. We also get to learn more about the world and all its intricacies, and the scope in this final book widens to the perfect level in my opinion. It brings in lots of different elements from the wider world and different creatures, all in a very believable way, but it doesn't go too big. It stays relevant to where we are and what we care about, if that makes any sense. And also the plot just gets epic. It just works up and up to the most wonderful, all-encompassing climax. I just had one of the best reading experiences with this book. I found it to be so immersive and entertaining and challenging. It has the perfect balance of world building and plot while still maintaining wonderful, fully fleshed out characters. I couldn't have asked for more. Quick funny story about this one actually. I had been badgering my fiance Cameron to read these books for ages because I knew he would love them as well, so he also decided to read the books back to back in time for the third book's release. This did mean that we were reading The Empire of Gold at the same time with the same copy. It was a lot of fun discovering the book at the same time, but we did have to have quite a regimented routine of who got the book at different points of the day and for how long. Anyway, that's enough about this series for now. All of the books got 5 out of 5 stars. Obviously, a favourite book of the year and a new favourite of all time. Coming into a huge change of pace, the next book I read was a memoir, and that was Between Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Structured through Ta-Nehisi Coates writing letters to his son, this book addresses a whole host of questions regarding American history and its fraught relationship with race, from slavery and segregation right up until the current crisis of violence towards and the imprisonment of Black people. So I got a lot out of reading this book. I found it to be quite enlightening and emotionally powerful. As well as looking at American history, this book is also interwoven with a lot of personal experiences and accounts, and I really enjoyed reading those sections. The book really managed to feel informative and reflective big picture, whilst also feeling individual and real. There isn't much more to say about this one other than it does what it sets out to do. If you're wanting to read something that illuminates America's past and uses this to shine a light on its present situation, then I couldn't recommend this one more highly. And also, if you're just looking for another personal account non-fiction book, then definitely give this one a go. And in the end, I gave this one 4 stars. Next up, I read Serge by J. Bernard. This is a contemporary poetry collection by a non-binary Black British poet. It explores the New Crossfire attack in 1981, a house fire at a birthday party in South London in which 13 young Black people were killed, popularly thought to be a racist attack. The collection traces a line from there to the Grenfell fire, as well as exploring British Jamaican culture more generally. I read this one on the recommendation of my friend Tom from TJ Reads the Stars. He recommended this one to me while commenting on my Pride Month recommendations, and I've also seen a few other people praising this one recently, so I bought it straight away. And I loved this poetry collection. I thought it was brilliant. I loved the themes explored in here. We focus in on very specific experiences as well as much wider ones. It looks at British history and memory and activism, and I loved that the poems were infused with Jamaican culture and Jamaican slang. And the language in here and the structure of the poems are so awesome. The poems feel really fresh and vibrant. They evoke such wonderful imagery and amazing rhythms and rhymes. They sound so good read aloud. If you love contemporary poetry, then pick this up. J. Bernard is a talent. And in the end, I gave this one 4.5 stars. Next, I picked up How the World Thinks, A Global History of Philosophy by Julian Baggini. This is a non-fiction book that does exactly what it says on the tin. It is a global overview of philosophical thought, touching on philosophies from India and China and Japan and the Middle East, as well as some early traditions from Africa and Australia. The reason that I picked up this book was specifically for its global scope. I do have a philosophy degree, and while I do know quite a bit about philosophy, I basically just know about Western philosophy, because philosophy degrees in the UK. And of course, Western philosophy isn't even half the story, so I was very excited to familiarise myself with philosophical thought from all around the world. And this book did deliver on that front. I thought it was a very good introduction into these different schools of thought. It gave a very nice range, and Julian Baggini definitely describes everything in here in a very clear and accessible way. That being said, I didn't love this book. I didn't gain much satisfaction from reading it, and to be fair, I do think that is because I am already so used to reading philosophy. The bits that I was already familiar with in here, I felt hardly scratched the surface for me, and then the bits that I didn't know about, I just wanted to get into the meat of them a bit more. But it's definitely a good overview, and I would recommend it if you haven't read much philosophy before and you're wanting a bit of an introduction. So I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. This is a relatively new and incredibly popular literary fiction novel right now. It follows 2 twin sisters who both grow up in a small Black community in Southern America, but as the sisters grow older, they end up diverging and taking on very different identities. 10 years later on, one of the sisters is still living in the same community in which she was brought up, living with her young Black daughter, and the other sister is living miles away with her daughter, secretly passing as white. So I bought this one very soon after it was published due to all of the hype. I was definitely intrigued by the premise. The cover is absolutely gorgeous and I just wanted to get in on what everyone else was in on. And I did really enjoy this book. There was a lot of good things going on in here. The idea behind the plot is very interesting. I was very intrigued by the ideas of self-identity and self-invention and family. I thought that the structuring in this novel was very well done. We switch between timelines and focus on the two different sisters. We also get to focus on their daughters at different times as well, and the ways in which the two different paths that came before them determined so much about their lives. I definitely got Homegoing by Yagayasi vibes in this way, and they are good vibes to get. The characters themselves were very interesting. I loved learning about the sisters and their relationship, particularly when they were young. As they got older, they kind of lost me a bit. I found them to be slightly less believable. Their personalities got a little bit lost, and because of this I ended up feeling a little bit less connected to them and less invested in their stories. The writing was good. It wasn't particularly special or unique, but it did have a few really nice moments. And so that all being said, I really enjoyed this book. I found a lot to admire in it, and I do think it had a lot of interesting things to say, but I wasn't blown away by it. I definitely don't love it as much as everyone else seems to. If I'm being honest, I don't think it was technically excellent in any way. It definitely wasn't bad, but it wasn't brilliant. So overall, this was good. I enjoyed it, but it isn't a new favourite of mine, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Next, I picked up How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. This is another non-fiction book that does basically exactly what it says on the cover. It argues for and advocates the idea that we must be anti-racist. Being merely not racist is not good enough. We must do more than being passive. We must be anti-racist. So this book was great. It was just what I hoped it would be. I found the central argument to be very strong and clear. I found it to be very informative, very helpful. I particularly enjoyed all of the different definitions that were provided throughout. So each chapter focuses in on a different area of racism or something that can interplay with racism, and each chapter will include helpful definitions of lots of different terms that you will probably have heard around. And it was really great to get some clear definitions of what all of these subtly different things mean. There were also personal experiences of Ibram X. Kendi's dotted throughout, which really helped bring the argument to life, and it definitely made the whole thing all the more impactful. So I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who is looking to be a better ally to the Black Lives Matter movement. It was both enlightening and practically helpful for me, which is just what I wanted, in giving me better and clearer ways to understand these issues, as well as how to better apply them to live a more effective anti-racist life. In the end, I gave How to Be an Anti-Racist 4 stars. Next, I picked up Antiometic for Homesickness by Romalyn Anti. This is a new debut poetry collection that I was very excited about. I mentioned this in my anticipated releases of the second half of 2020 video. I will leave that linked around if you want to check it out. And I actually read this one on my Kindle to review for NetGalley. So this collection tells the story of generations of migrants from the Philippines in the UK. It looks at one's homeland and colonization and family, and it is steeped in Filipino folklore. As soon as I heard about this collection, I was intrigued, as well as loving the sound of the content and wanting to learn more about Filipino culture. The cover is absolutely gorgeous. Someone did a good job there. And the name is also so clever and intriguing. I tip my hat. Thankfully, this collection did live up to my high expectations. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. It really is clever how two worlds are brought together in this collection. We have the richness of the Philippines and many family and wider cultural traditions explored in here, and we also have Britain, migrants who are separated from family and who find exile in employment. And there are so many clever bridges throughout this collection, including Tagalog being studied throughout, and the whole thing just comes together to create such an effective and emotional call to the struggles that can come along with seeking belonging and assimilation. I will say that there were a few poems in this collection that I didn't feel that I was fully getting. There were certainly cultural references that went over my head, and also just layers of meaning that I wasn't quite connecting the dots with in my first reading. I do feel that I would get more from this collection on a reread and would have an even greater emotional response to it. So overall, I found this collection to be very beautiful and quite powerful. I think the medium of poetry was the perfect choice for exploring these different experiences and feelings. In the end, I gave this one 4 stars, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who is interested. Next up, I read Nothing Can Hurt You by Nicola May Goldberg. This is another new book which I kindly received a copy of from the publishers. Thank you very much. This is a literary fiction novel inspired by true events. It explores the aftermath of a college student's murder on a campus in the 1990s by looking at a whole host of different voices who were connected to the event. So I had super high expectations going into this book. I'd heard it described as Little Fires Everywhere meets The Virgin's Suicides. It definitely gave me Three Women vibes. I was hoping for it to be dark and gripping, but also insightful and scathing in its commentary surrounding gendered violence. And this book did do all of those things to some extent. I enjoyed the idea here a lot. I enjoyed the structuring of the book, focusing on multiple different voices. I thought that was a very clever idea. And I did enjoy the general vibes of the book. It was quite tense and gripping, and it definitely kept me wanting to read. Unfortunately, where this book fell a little flat for me was with its characters. While the different perspectives in here were very interesting, I didn't find the different characters' voices to be nearly distinct enough from one another. They all sounded pretty similar. They kind of blurred together in my head, and because of this, I didn't really end up caring for any of them. I also wasn't clear on what some of the voices more than others were trying to do or say. And I actually think that's a wider issue with this book. I don't think it was exactly clear on what it was trying to say. It's focusing on a very interesting and important topic, but I didn't find it to say anything particularly new. So overall, I did feel a little bit disappointed by this one. I think it had cool elements and a lot of potential, but it just didn't deliver for me. So in the end, I gave this one 3 stars. Next up, I read Susie Bane by Douglas Stewart. This is another new book that I was massively excited about, and one that I was very pleased to receive a proof copy of by the publisher. It's a book that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of now due to it being longlisted for the Booker Prize. Get in. This is a chunky coming-of-age literary fiction novel following the childhood of a young boy called Susie Bane, growing up in Margaret Thatcher era 1980s Glasgow. We follow Shuggy's story, and most primarily his relationship with his mother over a few different timelines from when he is a young boy to when he is a teenager. So this is a stunning novel. I adored it. Firstly, it is one of the best, rawest, most sympathetic depictions of working class families and alcoholism that I have ever read. It captured a very specific time and place so well. I was utterly transported, totally convinced. All of the characters in here are wonderful. Shuggy and his mother in particular are so well thought through, so complex. Their relationship with one another was fascinating to read about. I thoroughly enjoyed following their stories and reading about their struggles and revelations and small happinesses. I found this book quite emotional. It definitely choked me up a few times, but it also made me laugh at times. It was infused with such a wicked humour. I also need to highlight the writing in this novel because wow, I'm still amazed that this book is a debut. It does not read like one at all. The writing is so delicious and feels so accomplished. It felt quite traditionally beautiful but also had its own uniqueness to it. I definitely had to go back and reread a few of the sections. As you can tell, this book blew me away. I am such a fan of Douglas Stewart now. I will definitely be reading more of his work in the future. If you like anything about the sound of this book, then please pick it up. It won't let you down. And of course, I ended up giving this one 5 stars. Next, I read As You Were by Elena Feeney. This is another one that I read on my Kindle and reviewed for NetGalley, and this one is coming out on the 20th of August. It follows a tough, driven woman called Sinead who throughout the book spends a lot of time in a failing hospital, but she is keeping the terrifying secret of her terminal illness from her husband and her sons. So unfortunately, I didn't get on with this book. We just didn't. So it started off pretty well. I was intrigued by the plot. It sounded as though it would be very character focused and like it would explore some interesting themes surrounding mortality and family. And I was also massively intrigued by the writing. It's very disjointed and stream of consciousness-y. We jump all over the place from present day to memories of the past. There are no speech marks throughout the book, so the speech is very interwoven with the protagonist's thoughts, but for whatever reason, I just couldn't connect to Sinead. I just didn't feel as though I got to know her well enough as a character, as someone who has likes and dislikes and passions and beliefs. I just didn't build up a picture of her basically at all, and so I couldn't connect to her. The writing also didn't work for me, unfortunately. I tend to like unconventional prose, but this one just didn't hit right. There were moments of real insight, but as a whole, I just found it to be too much. It was too confusing and distracting. So yes, this one wasn't for me. I really wanted to like it, but I just didn't, unfortunately. And in the end, I gave this one 2.5 stars. Next up, I read All Men Want to Know by Nina Bouraoui. This is another new release that I was kindly sent a copy of, this one being an autobiographical novel originally told in French, and I believe this one was translated by Anissa Abbas Higgins. It traces the author's childhood in Algeria, her relationship with her mother, and their eventual move to France after a terrible act of violence is committed towards her mother. So there was a lot about this book that I enjoyed. I really enjoyed the structuring. It's comprised of short chapters that flip between Nina's childhood in Algeria and her young adulthood in Paris. I loved reading about both timelines. Her memories of Algeria had this blissful sun-soaked haze around them, which was wonderful to read about. In Paris, she's growing into many facets of her identity, including most prominently her sexuality, and seeing little snippets of this journey that she goes on was really interesting. I was interested in the political context of the tensions between Algeria and Paris, and the approaching civil war, and what all of this meant for a young family. The writing in here is also very nice. It had some of the most beautiful little descriptions, but while I did find this book very interesting and technically very good, I didn't quite fall in love with it, and I think again that is because of a disconnection I felt with the main character and the story. There were so many interesting things in here that were touched on, but that was it. They were merely touched on. I wanted more. I wanted to learn more about Nina and her mother and their relationship with one another and the trauma that they went through. I wanted to learn more about Nina's self-discovery journey. So ultimately, there were a lot of good things in here, but we just didn't go deep enough into them for me. If you do like the sound of this one though, I would definitely recommend still giving it a go, and in the end I gave it 3.5 stars. The penultimate book that I'm going to be talking about today is Loveless by Alice Oseman. This is a hugely anticipated and popular YA novel. It follows an 18-year-old girl called Georgia who is going off to university with her two best friends. It has a big focus on self-discovery and identity and friendships, and it famously features aro ace representation. So I have very mixed feelings about this one. I love Alice Oseman's YA, so contemporary and believable, featuring such cool and interesting characters, such accurate and humorous dialogue, and this one did have a lot of that in it, but in many ways it just didn't quite hit the mark. So let's start with the characters. On the whole, I really liked them. There is a great cast of diverse, quirky, interesting characters in here. Interestingly, I do have to say that I actually enjoyed Georgia's character the least out of all of them. A little bit annoying at times. The main thread of this book is Georgia coming to terms with her sexuality and figuring out that she is aromantic asexual. This is common knowledge for anyone who knows anything about this book. It is basically its main selling point. And while I did enjoy reading about this to some extent, it isn't something I have read about in a protagonist before. I didn't think it was particularly well handled. It was definitely over explained in some places. It felt quite repetitive. It felt to me as though the publishers and the editors of this book were going for a very clear definition of aro ace to avoid any confusion, but this did mean that it didn't feel totally authentic. It felt a little bit forced. I've also read some really insightful reviews about how being aro ace is depicted in this book, and I will leave them linked down below if you're interested. They are far more qualified to talk on the subject than me. There were also just a couple of things in this book that happened that I didn't completely buy. It was far too obvious that they were put in there for plot reasons, and overall the whole thing just felt a little bit too rushed for me. It just didn't feel to the same standard as Radio Silence and We Were Born for this, which is such a shame because I know that Alice Oseman can deliver that standard. That all being said, I did read this book quite quickly. I did want to know about the fates of the characters, and it was quite enjoyable. So overall, I'd say definitely not her best book, but not the worst thing ever. And in the end, I gave it 3 stars. Oh. Last up in July, I read Strange Flowers by Donal Ryan. This is another proof copy that I was kindly sent by the publishers, and this one is coming out on the 27th of August. This novel is set in a rural Irish village in the 1970s when Paddy and Kit's daughter disappears. A few years later, Moll returns very much changed, and the family have to relearn things about one another and figure out how to live together again. So I loved this book. I think it is so lovely. We are back after a camera fatality, so apologies if anything has moved. So let's start by talking about Donal Ryan's writing. Sublime. He has a very distinct writing style. It is very descriptive and almost lazy. Not lazy like lots of mistakes, lazy like lazy. You get me? It suited this story and the setting and the characters so well. I can't explain how it managed to just bring everything to life, but it did. I was fascinated by Paddy and Kit and their life and their relationship and their beliefs. I really felt like I got to know them and I felt what they were feeling without Donal Ryan having to spell it out for me. I also loved learning about Moll and what she had been through and how she felt different and how that led to what she did. This is such a perfect, touching account of love and loss and discovery, while also subtly challenging notions within race and sexuality and misogyny and faith. This is just such a beautiful, evocative novel. I don't want to say too much more because I feel like you should just experience it for yourself, but know that this will make you feel transported and touched. It is such a gem. In the end, I gave this one 4.5 stars. So there we go, we are finally done. Those are all the books that I read in June and July. I feel like this video is going to be very long, so apologies if that is the case, and thank you so much to everyone who has made it to the end. I would love to know your thoughts on any of these books. Have you read them? Do you want to read them? And also tell me about some books that you've been reading recently that you love. I would love to hear about them. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. As always, I hope you're well, and I look forward to seeing you soon in another video. Bye.